Welcome to the KC Ingram Show Meet Your Candidate series. No spin, no agenda, no endorsements, just the candidate. If you like this show, be sure to hit the subscribe button. I'm KC Ingram. Let's get into it. Wayne Richter is running on the Democratic ticket for the House of Representative District 85, currently held by Toby Overdorf, who has termed out. Wayne, welcome to the show and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you for having me. As you said, I'm Wayne Richter. I live in Palm City. I've been married to my wife. We're going on 22 years in November. We have three children. My oldest just graduated from Martin County High School last
Nice.
week, and she's going to go to UCF here in the fall. I have a son who's a sophomore. He's going to become a junior at Martin County, and we had another graduation this week. My youngest daughter is graduating from Hidden Oaks Middle School and will be going to Martin County in the fall. I'm a lawyer that have a practice here in Palm City, but really practice on the Treasure Coast. This will be Martin, St. Lucie, Indian River out in Okeechobee County. Plugged into the legal community for a long time. I'm involved with something called voluntary bar service, and voluntary bar service is what it sounds like, right? You volunteer your time. I served as the APAS president of the Martin County Bar Association. I'm the chair of our 19th Circuit Grievance Committee, and then involved in some rulemaking committees with the Florida Bar at the statewide level. So I've always found kind of giving back to the community to be very rewarding. And that's why I've stepped up to run this time. I think I'd like to take that service-oriented mindset and really go to Tallahassee and represent the community. I think people are kind of tired of the same type of people going to Tallahassee that may be backed by special interest. And really the platform I'm running on are Florida issues. It's not left-right issues.
And we're going to get into those throughout this interview. And you actually answered my first question with your career has been a criminal defense attorney. Why stepping into politics now? Wonderful university.
Yep.
So, Wayne, what was the moment where you said, I just can't complain about the direction of things, I need to run?
Well, I wish I could tell you, there is a specific moment, right? But this was kind of a slow boil. I kind of was tired of just waking up every day to the chaos. I think most of us just want to go about work and raising our kids and taking kids to activities without worrying about what's happening today with our government. But specifically, this coming up weekend, I'm going to be sworn in as the vice president of the Florida Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. And part of being on that executive committee the last several years, we've been going to Tallahassee to talk with our legislators, to talk about what our priorities are, talk about what our concerns are. And I've been telling people every time I make that long drive back from Tallahassee, to Palm City, I leave with the feeling that there's just not a lot of serious people up there, or they're not focused on what serious issues are. So on the way back from the drive earlier this year, I decided I was going to throw my hat in the ring because I want to be pragmatic. I think there's too many things going on. I've been telling people, if you follow, for instance, this gerrymandering thing they've been working on, well, that's not bringing down the cost of people's health insurance. There's a lot of side issues that people are working on. It doesn't bring down your property insurance. So there's a lot of us, what I call the quiet middle, who feel like we're not being represented. So I just couldn't do that anymore. And I figured now's the time to do it.
Excellent. Now, District 85, for folks that don't understand, it's northern Martin County. I'll put a map up here. And then into St. Lucie County as well.
Right.
This has definitely leaned Republican traditionally. And why do you believe your message can connect across party lines?
Well, I think it's typically lean that way. I think what you're seeing every day, there's more and more people who are identifying as, no party affiliation. So St. Lucie County in particular has a large NPA segment. And I think people are kind of looking for something different. I think less and less, you may have the fringe folks who are diehard in their parties, but I think there's a large segment of people they just want something different. They want something steady, and they want something where they believe they can trust the candidate to look out for themselves. Now, beyond that, this district we think is flippable. According to some math, a study out of Princeton, this is probably a 7 to 7.5% lean Republican. And we've been seeing nationwide margins larger than that being overcome. And I think people will be receptive if we stay on my message of affordability, strong public schools, trying to slow the overdevelopment of the Treasure Coast. These are why people moved here, and it's starting to lose its character. And then the other thing is the Indian River Lagoon. My family enjoys being on the water. We have a very small boat. We like to go out and fish. We like to go out and swim. And I hear every year that when people run, There's people taking photo ops at the Indian River Lagoon, and then you never hear about it again until every 2 or 4 years when there's another election. So, I think those messages are what resonate.
And how would you describe yourself politically to voters who do not know you yet?
Uh, I will tell you this. I have been a lifelong Democrat, and let me tell you why. I grew up in a family that were Democrats, and I think it kind of originated with my grandfather. He served in World War II. He was in at what they called then the U.S. Army Air Force. And when he came back to the States, he was able to go to college on the GI Bill, right? And I think that was a time when many Americans could see that the government was working for them, that the government was trying to make their lives better, that the government was trying to give people that opportunity. And I think that just naturally got passed down through our family as historically what Democrats, were about, that the government works for you as opposed to the other way around. That said, kind of what I mentioned earlier, though, I'm finding more and more, I'm really in that middle. I think there are parts of me that probably lean a little right of middle with certain issues. There's parts of me that lean a little left on issues, but I just see myself as a regular person. I'm not involved with party politics. I've never involved with local party politics like Democratic clubs and caucuses. And I know this sounds cliche, but I just kind of wanted, I think in my mind, I know what's right and wrong, and I know what people are concerned about. And that's just kind of been my lane.
Excellent. And we always encourage people, look at the candidate, look at the person. So appreciate that really in-depth, description and understanding of who you are. One thing that is a really big issue here lately in the last couple sessions is taking away local control. We have the Live Local Act. We have SB 180. Surprisingly, these went through Tallahassee, the House and the Senate with almost zero opposition. And, how do you, Wayne, see yourself in a position like that? Because I don't think that really all the senators and representatives supported it, but I think that they kind of were forced or strong armed by the party. In fact, and I'll say it, what I heard kind of went on is if you don't vote for this, we're going to withhold funding for your constituents in your area. How do you address that?
So I'm going to try to address it with the pragmatism that I have to bring from my experience as a lawyer. Part of my job every day is talking to other lawyers and trying to find common ground where we can. And maybe this is naive, but I'm hoping when I get to Tallahassee, I can sit down with people either from the Democratic Party, from the Republican Party, and let's get to the root of, what's behind this. That particular bill originated out from a Republican out of Hialeah. And the idea is under the guise of we want to make affordable housing. Now we'll see if that actually translates into affordable housing, but it seems kind of like I'm talking here to your point with local control. It's build, build, build. And I think you need to kind of follow the money, right? Who's being backed by these big developers? And I think that's part of what's happening in Tallahassee as well. You have these, people of influence who fund these races. And that's one of the things I found interesting when I got in the race. The amount of money that's poured in to a state house race is overwhelming. Historically, you would just send someone from your neighborhood right to the state house. They had a career, in the old days, maybe you were a farmer or something like that, or you were a teacher and your community trusted you and you would go there. And we have gotten away from that. And I think that to your point earlier that's what people are looking for. I've never run for anything in the civic arena. And I really think that I have the opportunity to go up there and bridge that gap and try to restore some common sense.
Well, you said affordability is one of your top concerns. What does that mean specifically to Treasure Coast families right now?
Well, I think in my thoughts on affordability really isn't one thing, right? It transcends multiple things. One of those is the rising cost of health insurance and the rising cost of property insurance. And what I've been sharing with people is I'm a solo practitioner and I don't have employer paid health insurance. So between my wife and our 3 kids, with our health insurance and our property insurance, we're paying over $30,000 a year. That's a lot of money. And that's a lot of money for most folks. And that's my frustration why I ran, because nobody's addressing those issues. Toby Overdorf here, as you mentioned, who's term limited, his bill was focused on this year on making sure that there's cursive writing in schools. Well, I had the opportunity. I've been trying to go around and talk to different community leaders to kind of educate myself on things I need to know and, stakeholders within the community. And I spoke with just this past week with the school superintendent for St. Lucie County. And he's like, we've always taught cursive writing in public school. So these are the distractions that I think people are tired of. where there's this opportunity to bring down these costs. Again, this is the second session in a row where they've gone to, or second legislative session in the last 2 years where they've gone to this special session to try to pass a budget bill, which makes you think the Republicans have a supermajority in the legislature and have had that for a number of years. Why can't they make this government work? So I want to go there. I want to try to work to bring down those costs. And the other thing is housing affordability. And I think we need to be careful when we use that word, because I think sometimes that scares people off, right? We're not talking about building low income housing. What we're trying to talk about is building workforce housing, right? Somebody who's a nurse, someone who's a teacher, your firefighters, your police officers. I was coming up I-95 the other day, and I see agency vehicles, police cars from all over different counties
Right.
going in different directions. And what does that tell us? That tells people can't afford to live in certain areas. And I think there are ways to give these builders some freedom, but I also believe that there's community responsibility, right? And I think there's a way to have some sort of a public private partnership to bring down some of these costs.
It is a really tough issue. Land cost is just escalated everything. So the affordability issues is a tough one to tackle. So definitely will take some work. But to your point about how expensive everything is, Governor DeSantis right now is, of course, trying to do something with the property taxes. They had talked about eliminating them for folks that live here, homesteaded here. Now he's going back and trying a different rendition where it's a higher homestead exemption. What are your thoughts on truly helping our property taxes? Because they're extremely expensive. Local governments just seem to, the more they get, the more they spend. They do not tighten their belts,
Right.
even though they just had to go through it, a little almost 20 years ago now, right? So what are your thoughts on that?
So how much time do we have?
I know, I know.
This is a very complex issue. So and there's a lot of things that tie together. Going back to, well, I want to talk about the overdevelopment of the Treasure Coast. So when you're growing at the rate that St. Lucie County is growing, and I tell people it seems like St. Lucie County is being turned into Broward County.
Mhm.
No offense to anyone from Broward, but that drives up the cost of property taxes, okay? Because when you bring in these bigger developments, you need more police, you need more fire, you need more roads, you need more utility, you need more schools. So I think part of the property tax issue, and by the way, St. Lucie County has the highest property tax in the entire state of Florida. And I think that goes to the way Port St. Lucie is being managed, because that's really where you see the growth.
Mhm.
And as far as, the bill that they're proposing, this is going to be, people are going to have to really look into what this means. I had the opportunity here recently to speak with the Martin County Sheriff again, what me trying to go to some of these community leaders, and they are concerned about the elimination of property tax. That's where a lot of funding comes from for law enforcement, for first responders. So we're going to have to decide as a community what is important to us. I feel probably like everyone else. I don't want to have to pay one more red cent in taxes than is necessary. But we live here for a reason, right? We want to live in a safe community. We want to live where there's A-rated schools. And if you eliminate the property tax, that's going to infringe on all of that. But that's going to be a tough message to sell, because people hear, if you can lower my tax rate, that sounds appealing. But you need to keep in mind, the state's not giving you anything back. They're going to have to find those fixed costs, and it's going to come from somewhere else, whether that's going to be increasing your sales tax. So those are things to be concerned about, because if you have, for instance, they raise your sales tax to 20%, the person who makes a lot of money, let's say you make $500,000 a year, well, spending 20% sales tax, you don't like it, but you have the ability to absorb it a little
Mhm.
better. If you're making $50,000 a year, that's a significant increase into your home budget.
Right. Absolutely. And with property insurance becoming such a big financial pressure, what do you think Tallahassee has gotten wrong trying to fix that issue?
Well, one, not working on it. I think, again, you have big lobbyists, right, who fund these campaigns, and people get there and want to stay there. I was telling somebody the other day, I feel like there were two lanes to become famous in our society, right? You'd be into rock and roll or you're a movie star. And I found like the third rail that the politicians have carved out is now you can be famous being a politician, right? Every day you turn on the news, you get to see these people and they're talking heads and all these different issues. They need to look to focus on it. And I think if you focus on it, there is a way to bring legislation to require insurance companies, one, to to manage their risk. We need to lock companies in to staying in Florida for a certain amount of time. In other words, you can't come set up insurance here, a hurricane blows through, and you go, we're out of the state of Florida. And again, it goes back to that public private relationship. Are there things the state can do to incentivize them to make sure that the risk in a catastrophic way, right? We're not talking about, you get flooding in your home because of water pipe burst, but
Mhm.
with catastrophic calamities, let's say, that the state can kind of help with those things. So there are different things that can be done to bring down those rates if people actually have the metal to want to do it.
And that's just it. I mean, I know there's still contractors out there that are still promising to replace your roof by turning it into insurance and making a claim, which is one of the biggest frauds that is out there that's caused so many, increases in pricing. And I know legislatures tried to address it, but it's still happening.
Well, but there's also a flip side to that, right? So we just recently had within the last few years, our insurance came out and there's nothing wrong with our roof. Okay. And they said, we're not going to underwrite your insurance unless you put on a new roof. And, that's something that needs to be looked at. That's the insurance company's way of mitigating their loss, but that's also driving up the cost of property insurance.
100%. I actually have a family member that has a situation just like that, and they won't insure unless you get a new roof, and the roof is perfectly fine.
Yeah,
So,
and that just happened to my parents. They live here in Palm City as well. They're senior citizens, and their insurer said, we're not going to rent you anymore until you replace the roof.
right, right. Now, one more affordability question, then we'll move on. A lot of the homeowners, especially the locals that have been here a long time, feel that they're just being priced out of the state that they grew up in. Do you think Florida is actually at risk of becoming unaffordable for our middle class families?
I think it already is. I think it already is. I know people are struggling with, look at gas prices here lately. It wasn't uncommon to see gas nearly $4.50 per gallon. That's taking money away from other places where you might have put that into the economy, right? The person who owns a mom and pop restaurant, that do different things here in the community. The cost of groceries have gone up. Going back to the housing, a lot of people, I think, I don't know if you've noticed, there are a lot of apartment complexes popping up on the Treasure Coast.
Oh, yes, we've noticed.
And not that a lot of them are inexpensive. A lot of them are expensive, but what it's allowing people where they're finding the affordability in the apartments is you may not necessarily carry property insurance there. You're not paying a homeowners
Right.
association fee. So that's where things are becoming unaffordable and people are losing the ability to have what has always been considered part of that American dream, right? Is home ownership. And so, yes, I think that is a concern, but I also think that concern is here now.
Healthcare costs are another issue that you mention a lot. What changes would you support to improve affordability and access?
I think a few things. One, we need to make sure for lower income families that there is maybe increasing Medicare, okay, Medicaid, kid care, early intervention, not waiting till you're incredibly ill where you go to the emergency room and increase the cost of health insurance that's spread out amongst other people. I think you need to require health insurance companies, if they want to be in Florida, that they have to be in every county in Florida. I know in the last few years, we had an insurance company who said, we're no longer going to write in that county. So again, it goes back to that mindset that we can't let that lobby group in Tallahassee influence what's right for Floridians. And I think that there are ways to bring that down. If you brought down some of these costs, you would increase the amount of people who are insured, which in turn can keep you at the same level of profit or maybe even more so.
Absolutely. And then I kind of liked what you were talking about, the dream of home ownership. And then, of course, a lot of apartment buildings are being built so that we can house more people. How do you balance affordability and also overdevelopment?
That's going to be tough, right? And a lot of that is now going to fall to the state legislature because of taking away that home rule that, county governments used to be able to manage what that growth looks like. And Martin County used to do a pretty good job of that, right? There was a slow growth and that Martin County was known for that. If you're familiar with the area, they're building this whole new field project west of the turnpike in Martin County, but these are still not affordable housing areas. Okay. And one of the solutions I thought to doing this, and I know I'm using this phrase frequently, but this kind of idea of the public private partnership, maybe that you can go build your $500,000 homes, but maybe there's a way we can work together where we say, if you're going to do that, we need you to build a certain amount of workforce housing. okay, that people can afford. And then we're just going to have to decide as a community, what do we want our community to look like? And that may vary from county to county and city to city within the Treasure Coast. I don't like one of the things they've passed in Port St. Lucie is to allow you to build, for instance, a mother-in-law suite in your backyard. And the idea behind that, right, is going to bring down cost because you could put more people into one plot of land. But people, when they bought there, they bought these properties for a certain reason, right? They wanted to have their space. I don't know that everybody wants to live next door to in a multifamily dwelling unit. So there are ways to do it. And if you when you do that in a city port like Port St. Lucie, you're still not alleviating any of the infrastructure problems, right? It's not taking away, there's not going to be more roads for the
Right.
more people who are moving in. So I think from my perspective, what that's going to look like is I want to hear from the different industry leaders on what is the way to do that. And what I'm telling people is I'm going to have an open door policy. I don't presume to know everything. All I can tell you is the way I've got to where I've been in my career in life is I'm not going to be outworked. I promise people I'll do the hard work. I want to listen to everybody. Not that I need to, trying to make a decision on consensus, but lay out for me the solutions, lay out for me what the problems are, and let's see what works best for our communities.
The Live Local Act did try to create legislation where a percentage of it, you get some breaks or even some ways to fund your project if a percentage was affordable. But Wayne, I feel like the affordability part of it is where there's a breakdown. People's wages have not followed at the same level as just our cost of living increases, and the homes are more expensive. So, to say a one bedroom apartment is affordable at 2,000 a month, it's not for most folks. It's a tough thing to balance.
Absolutely. And one of the things too, that's what type of business are we bringing to this community? Florida's always had a heavy service-based industry. And like you said, the costs haven't kept up with inflation, for instance. That is going to be a tricky thing for government to figure out because if private industry is not willing to raise pay, we're going to have to find these solutions to make it more affordable for folks. And I think that's where kind of going back to working with these big developers to kind of bring down the cost or at least have lower costs for people to get into these homes is going to be important to do that.
So, moving on to another topic here, you've emphasized strong public schools and teacher pay. What concerns you most about the current state of education in Florida?
When I was growing up, there you had two choices for the most part. You went to private school and your family paid for that, or you went to public school. And I've always thought being a product of the public school system, that is one of the crown jewels of the United States, that anybody who wants an education can have an education. And that ties back into the property tax too, right? You have a lot of
Mhm.
people who go, well, I don't have kids. Why am I paying for this? Because our country used to want to look out for each other, right? And you
Right.
would pay that because you want children, whether you don't have children, whether you have children or not, you want educated workforce because those are going to be your potential employees. Those are going to be your potential customers for whatever your business is. So that's an important thing. And what we're seeing is money, and they call it school choice. And I think that's misleading, right? It sounds good that, it empowers people to say, I get to do what I want with my tax dollars, but it's at the expense of other children. And when you see these charter schools, or now they're doing vouchers, it's speaking the other day with some educators, every child in Florida is given a dollar value estimate, right? Let's say it's $8,500.
Mhm.
And then let's say you have two kids. They're going to give you $17,000 to homeschool. Then what is happening is maybe it doesn't work out after the first 9 weeks or the second 9 weeks. They're putting these children then back into the public school. The family still has the money that was outlaid for those children. Now the public school system is on the hook to provide for those kids, but not getting those dollars. And they're finding in a lot of cases that those children, when they come back to the public school system, are not really on par where they should be. I was at an event though last night, and I had a couple women approach me and they say, "Hey, we homeschool. We've heard you talk about this, but you can't paint it with a broad brush." And their case is a little different than everybody else's. The woman who was homeschooling her children used to be a teacher in the public school system. So, I think she probably can do it in the right way. But schools have fixed costs too, right? So the idea that people leave the schools and go to charter schools and home schools. Well, that doesn't change the cost of of the school in particular, right? They have the same maintenance costs. They have the same cost for teachers. They have the same cost for textbooks, and they have that less money to be able to put into the school system. So if we prioritized education in Tallahassee, this wouldn't be an issue. In other words, if teachers were valued, Florida teachers are the lowest paid in the entire country. And there was a study that came out I saw a couple weeks ago that Florida students have the worst reading ability in the country. I think there's a correlation there, right? You can't be first in reading and last in teacher pay. So we need to decide, are we going to prioritize education or are we not?
That actually is bringing me into my next question, but I'm going to step back one point here. The charter schools. What would you propose, Wayne, on oversight with charter schools? Because there's some really good charter schools out there, but then there's some also very fly by night charter schools. And I feel like families are putting them in. They don't know exactly where they're enrolling their child. They think it's a good school, but what kind of safeguards would you propose so that maybe some of these fly by night charter schools are not,
Well, I think
approved?
sure. I think there probably needs to be a little bit more oversight to that. What's the curriculum they're teaching? What are the benchmarks that these schools are making? To be honest with you, the charter schools have a little bit more oversight than the homeschooling does. And, I don't again have necessarily a problem with the charter school, but the idea that you're taking public dollars and putting them into these private institutions, and you have, I think to your point, they're calling them charter schools, but you're creating through the homeschool lane situations where we're having what's called mini districts, and you have people maybe owning multiple schools under the guise of homeschooling, and that money's going siphoned off to those type of things where, again, there's no regulation. There's no way to make sure that our students are ready to if they decide to go into the workforce after high school, whether they decide to go on to secondary education, high school, or into college, universities, that type of thing. Um, and you also have to look at the charter school because I think it depends on the area you live in, right? There seems to be maybe better charter schools in the more affluent areas. And in the less affluent areas, you have the same issue where maybe your charter school doesn't have the best education being provided to you. And why are you sending your kid to a charter school? There's a lot that goes into those decisions. And I think that's where there needs to be this community conversation. Why do you think the public school is failing you? What can we do to strengthen a public school? And there's a lot to unpack why those people go there. I think, you hear this at a nationwide level. And I've never seen this personally, but there's this idea in public schools and in public universities that somehow students are being indoctrinated. I've never been indoctrinated to a left or liberal mindset at any time in school, right? I had a struggle with algebra. I had a struggle with chemistry. There was no time for anybody to give me their political bias. But I find what I see is I think people want what their own bias is with the charter school, right? So you go to a charter school and we call it classical education. A lot of these are faith-based, and that's fine. But to make the argument that I don't want anybody indoctrinated here, well, you really want them indoctrinated on your side. So, and again, you're not going to solve that with charter schools, but there was a push in Tallahassee, like I said, to come up with a creative phrase for school choice. But these charter schools have a big lobby in Tallahassee as well. And, you hear the cliche a lot of times, follow the money. That's part of it. It's being sold as school choice, but a lot of these are for-profit charter schools.
Absolutely. And I agree with you. There has to be some sort of, in my opinion, just some oversight. And I know children are different the way that they're taught and how they respond. So I love having different opportunities for children. My daughter, for example, went to the public school and she went to a private school. And now she is going to a charter school, Clark
Mhm.
Advanced Learning. And, so I have a perspective from each and every one of those. But I do see some charter schools that, I would not send her to. So,
But Clark is an amazing school. I mean, you have a
correct.
lot of bright students who go there, and I think we can use that as a model, right? Why is Clark doing such a great job, and you have brilliant kids that are going there? What can be done with that to make these charter schools maybe work together? If you have one that is fantastic, what can you do to raise the standard at your charter school for these that are really successful?
Lots to discuss there, but I'll move
Yeah.
on. Teacher shortages continue across many of the districts. In your view, why are we struggling to retain teachers?
Okay. I mean, very simply, the pay. My sister was a school teacher up in Lake County, and when you start a family, it's tough to make it on a school teacher's salary, and that creates two problems. One, the ability to attract good teachers, and then the problem of keeping good teachers. I recently heard from someone who's going to leave the public school system to go teach at a Montessori school, and I think part of that is the idea that government is making it harder for teachers in the public school system to teach, to maintain order, to maintain discipline, and they don't feel supported by school boards. So a lot of that is they want to go somewhere where they feel they have a little more freedom to actually teach curriculum and not necessarily be caught up in red tape at a public school.
So, if elected, what would you push or what would you introduce to rectify the compensation issue?
You'd have to file a bill to raise the teacher pay. And one of the things too, you've got to do this in a way not just to raise teacher pay for people coming in, because I know this creates a little friction, right? If you raise the starting pay for new teachers, but you do nothing for the teachers who have been there for 10 or 15 years, and they're going, wait a second, this person's making, maybe 2 or 3 grand less than I am, and I've been teaching for 15 years. So we need to find a way to apportion that to keep people happy and to retain the quality teachers. And there needs to be a way to do that as well, right? To make sure that these teachers are qualified teachers. We do a lot of testing for students. What are we doing for benchmarks for teachers?
And I can hear the schools already, Wayne, because you were just talking to the issue they're losing student funding. So typically these things come out of Tallahassee as an unfunded mandate to the schools. So you can say, yes, you have to pay your teachers more, but how do you fund that?
Well, that's going to be the wrinkle with property tax, right? Now we're going to take that away. It's going to be harder. And like I said, I've talked to a lot of these, public agencies, the sheriff's office, the school districts. That concerns them. And I don't know yet what the governor's solution is going to be to that. And again, I feel like this is one of those distraction issues, right? It's a way to we're going to keep power because we're going to send this populist message of we're reducing your taxes without anybody thinking through the practical long-term effects this is going to have on your first responders, on your school system, on making sure your roads aren't, full of potholes.
Do you think the education policy in Florida has become too politicized?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you've seen that within the last 10 years. You've had different advocacy groups pop up in the local school system, and we want to get rid of this book and we want to do this type of thing. And again, that's a distraction because you can pull books out of libraries, but guess what? Your children are going to find the material on the internet. So, these are things that sound good in a soundbite and you feel like you're crusading for something, but it's not a long-term effect. And it creates a wedge because I think it makes you wonder who's looking out for my student. One of the things, that's interesting with our sheriff's office, right? These are political officers. I like to think no matter where I live, if I live in a Republican leaning district, I'm hoping that if I need the sheriff's office, they're coming to help me, whether I'm a Democrat or I'm an independent.
Right.
And the same thing applies to the school. If you start electing, people who are conservative, I don't mind them being conservative. What I need to know is, do you have my students' best interest at heart? And the concern is, yes, that things are becoming political.
So Brightline's another big issue. Right now, it's been reported that they could be on the brink of bankruptcy. If that were to happen, would you support a government bailout?
No, I wouldn't. They've decided to enter the market. They had the experience to project what ridership would be and what their cost would be. To be honest, it seems like they probably built that out too rapidly. It used to have a Miami station or a Broward station, Palm Beach, and then up to Orlando. Now they're putting in a lot of these stations in between. And maybe their model is we need more stations to get more ridership. Do I think having a Brightline station on the Treasure Coast would be convenient? Yeah, it would be. And I've told people they're coming through here anyways. maybe we could benefit from it. But no, I wouldn't support a state bailout for that. I think that would be irresponsible.
And going back a little bit to development, how do you balance private property rights with community concerns about your density and quality of life?
Well, I think that's multiple things, right, to unpack. So the density issue, that goes back to the home rule that's been stripped. And one of the things I've seen too is this legislative session is the state is really assuming a lot of power from community governments, from county governments, from the local municipalities. And that's a bad idea because the state of Florida is very diverse. What works in South Florida may not work in the panhandle. So the density issue goes back. We need to have the power locally to determine what that looks like here. And then tell me again the second part of the question, because I felt like there were a couple there packed into one.
So the whole question, how do you balance private property rights with community concerns about density and quality of life?
Well, I think private property rights are the private property rights. I mean, if we're talking about eminent domain, I don't think that's a valid way to go with certain things. If they're going to follow eminent domain, then we can't squeeze the public there. They need to pay fair market value if you want to take your home or you want to widen the road. I was thinking that the other day, if you drive down Port St. Lucie Boulevard, you've got people whose homes are right on a major thoroughfare. And I can't imagine what it's like every day trying to back out of your driveway. So let's say we want to widen that road, but we need to purchase all these homes down the sideline. I don't want you just coming in here. We're saying we're the government. We're going to take it. You need to pay these people what they deserve.
And also with that, I think part of it would be for building apartment buildings, for example. People are like, no, we have too much density here already. But if it's zoned for an apartment building, that's a property right.
It is, but we've had that all along, right? It's always been up to the county commission how to zone things. So they should be empowered, again, to develop their community the way they want it to be zoned. And that's just always been a part of who we are. I mean, I saw up in St. Lucie, out towards Tradition, that Riverland area, you have like major hubs there. You have an Amazon facility there. You have a Cheney Brothers facility there. Literally across the street are housing. And I think maybe that part of that is the property right. I guess if you choose to live there, you choose to live there. It's kind of like choosing to live on a golf course. You may have to worry about a golf ball hitting your roof.
That's right.
So I'm for property rights, but it goes back to the managed growth. I don't think anybody should just be able to set up what they want. I mean, I have a home. Should I be allowed to put in an amusement park on my, quarter acre of property? We need to be realistic.
Right. Right. You pretty much answered this, but just directly. Do you believe Tallahassee has taken too much control away from local government on development issues?
Absolutely. I mean, with this legislative session, I mean, it's local for the most part. It's going to be toothless, because all that process is going to run through the state now, and under the guise that we're trying to streamline things. But absolutely, the whole point is, even with the school board, if you remember, people didn't want education being taught from Tallahassee or from Washington,
Right.
D.C. The idea was always let our community decide what's best for our community. And now that's going to go away. That's going to go away with all this development.
So
And how far do we build out? How far do we build out? Like, I also believe
yeah.
Florida has an important history, and we keep encroaching further west and further west and further west. And what does that do for part of our economy? We have part of our areas an agriculture economy. You have farms out there with cattle. You're going to drive those people away.
Right. Right. It is. It is definitely encroaching further and further west for certain. The Indian River Lagoon, that's really the blood life of our community. It's central to our community. What do you believe is the biggest threat to the lagoon today?
Well, it's got to be the discharges from Lake Okeechobee, right? And why is that important? Well, I think it affects recreation. A lot of people like I said earlier, that we like to be on the Indian River Lagoon to fish. We like to be out there, just to enjoy the water, but it's a vital part of the economy. I had a meeting with the Marine Industry Association of the Treasure Coast here within the last couple of weeks. I mean, you have repair shops for boats, you have restaurants on the lagoon, you have hotels on the lagoon, you may have a mom and pop, bait shop on the lagoon.
Mhm.
If you people come to this area to enjoy what this area has to offer, and if you don't maintain the lagoon and keep it clean, that's going to hurt our economy. I feel, again, there's a lot of talk, and seems like a lot of funding to what they call send the water south, but I don't know that anybody's actually seen that occurring. And I think that's going to be an issue where state government's going to have to work with the federal government, right? The Army Corps of Engineers are involved with that. And I didn't know this as part, like I said, learning more and more to be educated about this run, that Lake Okeechobee is one of the dirtiest lakes in the entire country. And maybe part of solving the Indian River Lagoon is solving the problem with Lake Okeechobee, right? The idea that we're going to protect the lagoon and not deal with Lake Okeechobee, that seems, counterintuitive. What can be done there to clean the lake? If you had a clean lake, then the discharges aren't as threatening as they are.
Do you think enough measurable progress is happening?
No. I mean, if you're an average person if you're an average person like me, again, like I said, I've never run for office. I'm plugged in the morning of where do I have to be for court, or who's getting the kids to school, and all that type of stuff. You don't know about it. And that's to me what I call the eyeball test, right? If you're just a person who's living your life and you're not following politics, how would you know that there's been any improvement to the Indian River Lagoon? You don't.
You're right about that. And it's a struggle between the agricultural community and the coastal community with the Indian River Lagoon. There's competing interests there. Do you believe they can coexist, or is this, I mean, this is a fight that's been going on for decades.
Yes, there is, because if you put the infrastructure into Lake Okeechobee, you can clean the lake. I mean, there's no reason as the traditional flow of the Kissimmee River into Lake Okeechobee and then eventually out into the Everglades. And I told someone this the other day, I don't want to shift the problem with Indian River Lagoon to the Everglades and have a dirty Everglades. Okay. But as that water flows south, there's got to be, kind of like we do with wastewater treatment, ways to treat that water and then continue to release it. So and again, this is a cliche, but where there's a will, there's a way to do it. And I know a
100%.
lot of this costs money, right?
Right.
And how are we going to fund these things? But Florida has huge billions of dollars in reserves. So it goes back again to what are our priorities as community?
Right, right, and I agree with you. The Lake Okeechobee needs to be cleaned as well, and the storm treatment areas. That's the idea. That's just not enough. One thing I will ask you though, it's cleaning Lake Okeechobee really isn't the only solution, because it's the fresh water coming into our brackish estuary that's just as destructive, even if everything was perfectly clean.
No, I understand that, but I guess if we can clean it and send it south, we don't have to worry about the discharges as
Gotcha,
much, right? Then
gotcha.
we keep that fresh water going where the fresh water was originally designed to go.
Perfect. What's one thing voters misunderstand about you?
I don't know yet. It's early. I'm not involved with a primary. One of the things I is a concern. One of the things you're taught as a lawyer is if you're in a trial and you have bad facts on your case, you want to be the one that brings that out to the jury. You don't want your opponent doing that, because then it looks like maybe you were hiding something. What I want people to know about me in this area goes back to one of the questions you asked about this being kind of a right-leaning district. I think at a state house level, party affiliation is less important. Maybe it is for United States Congress. Maybe it is for United States Senate, for people who are running for president. I don't want people thinking because I'm a Democrat that Wayne must be way to the left. And I think sometimes Democrats in this state, and maybe Republicans now too, right, that they're both being painted by these people on the extreme
Mhm.
fringe. I'm not. I live here for a reason. I want to be in a safe community. I want an area of this community that feels like home. And this has been home for me for decades. So what I want people to know is don't worry about the letter after my name. I got into this race because I want to represent you. And you and I have more in common than we don't. And I'm not using this as a stepping stone. I wasn't looking for a title. I'm not the type of person who was on a city council and then wants to go to county commission and then become a state rep and then maybe a state senator, set up sometime a governor's race. I don't have those aspirations. I got into this because I know my friends, my family, people in this community desire something different. So what I want them to know, and I don't know how you sell that. I think one of the things I want to do is I've said I'm trying to build this race one conversation at a time, because I think everybody, when there's a campaign, says, hey, trust me.
Yeah.
But I think if you met me and you get to know me, my intentions are good. I'm not coming from a political background. I don't have anybody from a special interest trying to promote Wayne to get him to Tallahassee. So I think the thing that's most important is get to know me, and you'll see that I want to bring common sense. I want to bring sensibility, and I want to be pragmatic.
Well, Wayne, I appreciate you having a conversation with me here today, and so I can share it with my listeners. And really, have gotten a lot of insight into who you are. Something you just said kind of struck me. I don't know if you can see behind me, but former Senate President Negron, when he was sworn in, they had a Democrat, and I don't remember her name at the time, but she spoke at his swearing in party. And one of the things that struck me is they said, 90% of the time, the Democrats and the Republicans get along. It's that 10% that get politicized, and the papers make it divisive, and the headlines. That's all anybody talks about. But the majority, the Democrats and Republicans actually do get along.
I agree. And I have Republican support behind me, right? Those are the friends. Those are the neighbors. Those are the people that know my heart. They know my intention, why I'm getting into it. And in my campaign kickoff video, one of the things I mentioned was I will work with anyone in Tallahassee who wants to do things that actually matter to everyday working people.
So, what's one issue in Tallahassee that gets too much attention and one issue that does not get enough?
I don't know that there's one of the reasons I got in, I told you, was the chaos right at the national level. And you see the chaos here. The affordability, right, of insurance, the affordability of housing, that's not getting enough attention. It seems like there's these kind of pet projects that are going on. And I mentioned that earlier, with the cursive writing. They passed a bill. There was not even a bill trying to propose this, but they passed a bill this year that local government, okay, cannot impose any restrictions or ban the use of gas powered leaf blowers. And I'm thinking, why are you wasting time on this where this is not an issue and not addressing the things that actually matter? So to me, I don't think there's a thing that gets necessarily too much. The issue really is, what are you not doing?
And if voters remember one thing about your campaign after this interview, what do you want it to be?
That Wayne is earnest, that Wayne is honest. I'm the son of a Methodist minister. I'm the son of a mom who worked in the private sector and also worked in the public sector. And I was raised to just do what's right. And I want people to know that I'm willing to go there and just do what's right.
My final question: why should an independent or even a Republican voter give Wayne Richter a serious look?
Because everything that Wayne is talking about affects Republicans, independents, and Democrats, right? These are things that matter to everybody. I'm not running on a platform on social issues. So you would vote or you would consider Wayne because, like I said, I just want to be pragmatic. I'm a person like you, and we just need some common sense.
Amen to that. So, Wayne, how can folks reach you? Do you have a website that they can get some more information on you?
Sure. It's very simple. It's WayneRichter.com. You can follow that if you're interested in getting involved. There's a link there to sign up to do different things. We're on social media. One of the things we're trying to do is keep everybody up to date at places I will be, and I want them to come out and talk to me. Right? Just come out and meet me. I want to hear too. This is another thing. Like, people ask me, Wayne, what are your policy things, or why are you running? Well, I can tell you why I'm running. What are you looking for? Right? That's the thing. A lot of politicians are doing a lot of talking. I want to do a lot of listening. So I'm encouraging people to, let's get together. Come find where the campaign is at. Let's see if where we align and what we can do better. And where are ways that government maybe should step back and stay out of the way.
Well, Wayne, I really appreciated getting to know you here today. I'd like to have you back this fall after we know who your opponent will be. That'll be after the August primary on the Republican side. And then we can compare the two candidates at that point. And very open conversation today. Appreciate your time here.
Anytime. I appreciate you having me and look forward to seeing you soon.
Whether you agree or disagree politically, these are conversations that matter to the Treasure Coast. The goal here is to hear directly from the candidates and let voters decide for themselves. Don't forget to follow the KC Ingram Show on Facebook and subscribe on YouTube for more real talk you won't hear anywhere else. I'm KC Ingram. Stay informed, stay engaged, and I'll see you on the next episode.